Welcome into another episode of the Swamp247 Podcast. My name's Jacob Rudner, alongside Swamp247 staff writer Graham Hall. And Graham, it's good to be back on the show, as we have been pretty much every day for the last week here, as we go through and preview every single position group on Florida's roster, talking about what they got, what they don't. We are almost through this. This is one of our final 3 position group preview podcasts. We have defensive line, linebacker, and secondary left. We are combining, for those of you who are curious, we are combining both outside and inside linebacker, as we are combining corner and safety into one podcast. The secondary, though, will have 2 written pieces. So you can go to swamp247.com and get a little bit more of an in-depth look at Florida's secondary as we break it down by corner and safety. But the purpose of this podcast here is neither of those position groups. We're here to talk defensive line. It's one of the thinner groups on Florida's roster going into the season, has been since the spring, but it doesn't mean there aren't a couple of standout players potentially within the unit. And so without further ado, let's break it down. Graham, this is a group that is potentially lacking in depth. I think that there is a very reasonable starting unit, maybe even a couple of key reserves here, but if an injury or 2 happens, Florida could be looking at a pretty dire situation along its defensive front. What are your thoughts and observations of the unit's depth? Who does it go to potentially beyond the Gervon Dexters of the world? Should something happen, or really should somebody just need a break and they got to go to a couple of those depth pieces during a game?
Yeah, a really young unit, Jacob. You pretty much hit the nail on the head there. They lost a lot of guys from last season's team. Zachary Carter now with the Bengals. They brought in a bunch of guys through the transfer portal last year. Antonio Valentino, Tyrone Truesdell, Daquan Newkirk. I mean, you name it. Jeremiah Moon. All of these guys are no longer in Gainesville. They lost 6 from the defensive line last year. And the guys that they had been developing either really hadn't, made the steps that I think people were hoping that they would have made in time and gotten valuable playing time last year. Kind of guys like Jalen Lee, Jalen Humphreys. Those guys really were still playing a second, if not third string role in this team, as was Princely Umanmielen. And now a lot of those guys around Javon Dexter are going to be counted on to play a good amount of snaps this season, a heavy amount of reps, honestly. Some of them are going to start, and we'll start with Princely Umanmielen. That's a guy who got 1 start last year in Florida's bowl game when some guys sat out, but he was a reserve last year playing behind Zachary Carter, and now it looks like he's going to continue where he left off in spring, which is going to be the starter at defensive end next to Dexter, although they did add some depth around him in the form of Tyreek Sapp, who has continued his progression throughout spring camp into the fall. I am pretty confident at what Florida has at the tackle position and at defensive end. But after there, it kind of becomes a big question in my mind where Florida turns to at nose and what they end up doing there, because I don't really think they have a guy that they can fully count on right now heading into the season.
Right. And I think that, we got to take a step back here. I'd say that we should really start talking about a guy who will provide that anchor for this defensive line before they even have to worry about getting into that depth. And that's Travon Dexter, somebody with undeniable first-round potential. I think that he's a guy who could finish the season on the first-team All-SEC list. A real tremendous talent who has improved after an impressive season last year. He's earned praise from just about everybody. Florida has utilized a moniker 4D players, somebody who can understand the role, not only that they play, but the guys in the position group play. And beyond that, the guys on their side of the ball. And if you're a 4D player, as Billy Napier has deemed it, all 22 roles. So when there are 22 football players on the field, you are aware of what every single one of those guys are doing. Gervon Dexter was among those singled out as one of very few Florida 4D players as we head into the season here. That is a big deal, not only from a, just an impressive character standpoint, but really a big deal just because it's another sign of him elevating his game. Very physically gifted, but clearly very mentally gifted. What does a guy like Gervon Dexter do for this unit? Again, like you talked about, it's quite thin. So this could be a more important season for a guy like Dexter than perhaps in a normal year.
Yeah, you use the word anchor, and I think that that's a really good description of what he brings to Florida. He's kind of been able to play multiple positions now in a variety of ways, dating back to not just the spring and preseason camp, but how he was used last year at several spots. He's a guy who I think has gotten in better shape and really has figured out what he was doing wrong last year a lot of the time. And when you're able to look in and see your faults and your mistakes from a year before and then improve on those, I really think that's going to up your game. And we kind of have touched on this as well on Swamp 247. This is kind of an overall theme of the Billy Napier regime, is making sure that guys were identifying what they had done wrong in the past and were honest with their mistakes, whether it was talking about taking plays off, and that they not just, embraced that, but they learned from it. And I think that's really what Dexter has done. He's become a much more of a professional. And, still, this is a guy who's technically classified as a sophomore here, is entering his third year, and he's played a large role already at a position that usually requires guys to be a little more physically gifted coming out of high school than we are used to seeing. So when you look at where he's at in terms of his career, the fact that he came in during the COVID year and now is already at a place where people are talking about him working his way up to a potential first-round pick, I think that leads to a situation where Florida, can look at this guy, despite his status, despite him really kind of needing things to improve upon, what he's already done in the past year has him being this, to use your word again, anchor of Florida's defensive line. And a lot of that is because of the depth issues here. Guys around him who came in around COVID or the year before as well, Jalen Lee, who we're going to talk about here in a second, and a guy like Tyreek Sapp, who didn't play at all last year. There's a lot of guys who are kind of seeing what it's like and what it requires by looking at a guy like Dexter, whether they're older than him or younger than him. And they're seeing that if you work hard, you are going to be rewarded with playing time. And I think that's going to unfold alongside the sophomore Dexter this year.
Absolutely. I think the thing that I'm most curious about going into this season is how much of a role Dexter can carve out, not in terms of whether or not he's a starter or not. I think that answer is we've long known that. I think what I'm looking for is how much is he able to stay on the field. This will be a season where guys' stamina at certain positions, I think, will be tested, especially at positions like linebacker, inside linebacker, defensive line. I think Florida's top receivers could experience this to a degree, where rotating in depth pieces will become more difficult. Simply, and again, like, just to be clear, this is not something that is really the fault of Billy Napier or anybody on his staff. This is what they've inherited. And it's a lack of depth at certain positions. And I think that obviously defensive line is one of those spots. And it could require guys to play more than they would on average throughout a game than they might in a season where the depth is closer to healthy, or if not healthy or above that. Florida certainly does not fall under those categories. And so a guy like Javon Dexter could be asked to play quite a bit. And my big question is, how much is he able to capitalize on that? Does he fatigue when he plays more than perhaps a normal defensive tackle would? Those are the kinds of things I will be curious to keep an eye on. But let's talk about the guys who could supplement the depth at the position, who could fill in for him. Chris McClellan is a guy who's come up quite a bit in terms of young guys stepping up and potentially carving out a role, and there are others. Who is standing out to you, maybe Chris included, amongst the reserve defensive linemen, especially guys who might be able to kind of spell a Gervon Dexter and get meaningful reps as a reserve?
Yeah, let's start with McClellan. I just mentioned that with Dexter, one of the big things is his ability to have played early at Florida based on where he was at in terms of talent level. Sure, that was what really led him on the field. Yeah, but it was the fact that he was physically ahead of where a lot of guys are coming out of high school. And the same can be said for McClellan. This is someone who has always prioritized his body, has always done the right things that he needed to do away from the field, whether it was, his diet, whether it was lifting weights, whether it's working out, prioritizing cardio, not snacking late at night. This is a guy who I think has done the right things before getting on campus, and that's why he's going to see the field and take advantage of some of these voids right now. With if he hadn't done that, you'd be talking about a situation that was similar to a lot of other guys at that position, where they come in and they just quite quite aren't ready from a physical standpoint. They have the potential and they have a lot of talent, sure, but they aren't really ready to do what you just said, play snaps at a high rate where they're able to stay on the field and they're not just kind of coming in to learn for 1 or 2 snaps and then they have to check out. That's why I think a guy like McClellan is going to see the field and be able to kind of stymie Dexter at times and give Florida a guy that they feel confident can rotate in. And then I also want to mention Justice Boone. That's a guy that a similar situation to Tyreek Sapp, a redshirt freshman, really kind of spent last year just learning behind the scenes, but now has really taken advantage of the spring, looks really, really good. I think he is going to be able to, they're going to go small a little bit sometimes on the defensive line and really only have one tackle in there. And I could see Dexter playing the nose in a package like that and where you have 2 ends on the field. And I think that Florida could use Justice Boone in a role like that, along with, Tyreek Sapp and Princely Umanmielen. So I think that, that those 4 guys, along with McClellan, Florida feels really good about those guys right now. There are actually, like I said, I think more questions at nose than some of the guys even backing up Dexter, which is, while that's a good thing for the depth, that isn't really great for the overall balance of the unit. Let's call it that.
Sure. Let's actually talk about that nose tackle position. Florida returns Desmond Watson, who is, a talented player in his own right, definitely has the skill to play, but there have been very reasonable questions about his physical conditioning over the last couple months. Dexter, officially on Florida's roster, is listed at 415 pounds. Sean Spencer, the team's co-defensive coordinator and defensive line coach, commented early on in fall camp, if not actually the day before it started, that the team was working on getting Dexter to a point where he could play, a series where he could play as a regular, every down type of contributor. They wanted him to become a more versatile player rather than just a big stopgap type, plug a hole type of nose tackle. What is the progress on that, to your knowledge? Is I almost said Javon Dexter. Is a guy like Desmond Watson close to a point where he is going to be able to get more reps, or are we looking at a situation where it's, 1 rep and come off the field and kind of plug and play at the nose tackle position?
Yeah, I think unfortunately it's kind of the latter right now when it comes to Desmond Watson. Some guys don't just have the combined package right away. And I think Florida's previous coaching staff knew that there were going to be challenges when it came to getting Desmond Watson to a physical shape where he could see the field for 5-6 consecutive plays at a time. That is going to be a challenge that, in my opinion, extends beyond 2022. He's not at a place right now after fall camp where you're able to play this guy more than 1-2 plays at a time. And I think, there is something to be said about having a situational guy who, when a team is wearing you down and picking up first downs and extending long drives, who can come in some short yardage situations, whether it's 3rd and 2, 1st and goal, even if they can play just a few series backed up into the end zone. That really, I think, does give you an advantage at times to have that. But obviously they would prefer, with all that said, they would prefer to have Desmond Watson be in a spot right now where he has gotten into better shape than he currently is in and is able to therefore play for longer stretches at a time. Everything else, what you mentioned, the talent level, that's all apparent. It's the rest of it that he is going to need to continue to work on. But again, he's only a sophomore. This is someone that, not even 20 years old is going to need a little bit more time. Not everyone is Gervon Dexter, where by their second year, people are already talking about them as a potential mid-round draft pick. That's not always the case for a lot of guys. If he can do what guys like Ethan White have done, there are plenty of people on this, Griffin McDowell, who have transformed their bodies. If Desmond Watson can, get in better shape, I can see him being a very productive player for Florida. Unfortunately, that's just not the case right now.
So I'll throw it right back to you. How does a team remedy that in like right now? What are the short-term solutions? Because you're not going to get Gervon Dexter. I keep saying that. You're not going to get Desmond Watson to a place where he's going to be capable of playing, multiple downs in a row, multiple reps. If at all this season, by the end of it, you would think it's going to be something that's a very long process. What does the team do right now to be able to experience as little turbulence at that position as possible? Is there a rotation of guys who are starting to emerge? Is it something that we're really going to learn the most about once the season gets going? Where do things stand at the nose tackle position?
Well, I think they feel really good about Jalen Lee, even though he is a little bit undersized for an ideal nose tackle. I think that Jalen Lee, his technique, his ability to be on the field for, like I said, consistently for multiple minutes without needing to sub out, his motor has improved absolutely. His knowledge of the defense. I think you could absolutely make a case where he is the guy who is out there when the defense takes its first snap against Utah. We're recording this Wednesday, August 31st. I think that in a couple of days, you could reasonably see a situation where he is the guy out there. And, I think one of the other ways that Florida can remedy it is by sending a message to everyone within the room that we've talked about this before, regardless of age, if you do the right things, if you take care of your body, if you spend extra time in the film room, learning the position, the ins and outs, regardless of your status, your year, you are going to get an opportunity to play. Billy Napier said that today on the SEC teleconference, and he has said that repeatedly throughout fall camp, that he is going to play players who are ready to play regardless of their status, their year on campus. So I think one of the ways you remedy that to a player is you place someone younger than them above them. It sends a serious message that, listen, if you don't do the right things, this is not a seniority approach. You are going to get passed over. Just like you were able to compete for it as a freshman on campus, so are the new freshmen. And if you don't do all the right things, you are going to lose your time in the pecking order. So I think that's one of the ways absolutely to remedy the situation. But after this season, Florida is going to either need to elevate its defensive line recruiting or do what the previous staffs did and address the defensive line in the transfer portal, which has been part of the reason why the situation is what it is, where they're counting on younger players.
Yeah, well, potentially some changes afoot at the defensive line position with some depth concerns. Florida, however, will have to find a way to mitigate that as the season gets going here. It's not going to improve by the time the season kicks off, and Florida will face a pretty solid challenge right out the gate, especially along that defensive front against a Utah team that not only likes to run its running backs, but enjoys a good option with its quarterback, who is plenty mobile. So Florida will have to stay on its keys. A solid test right out the gate for this thin defensive line room. It will be interesting to see how they perform. With that, though, Graham, any final thoughts about the defensive line room as we continue to get through more positions here?
No, not really. I think that it's going to be a productive unit, and then Gervon Dexter is going to surprise a lot of people. You and I talked about this in our season preview podcast, which we encourage everyone to listen to, download, and check out a lot of the written content on Swamp247. But when we talked about Javon Dexter in the season prediction podcast, I think you and I both stressed repeatedly that we think he is going to have a year that elevates him into first round NFL conversation. I think that there were some people who were down on him. He was ranked 80th in ESPN's top 100 returning players this year. And in my opinion, that's kind of something that would put a chip on my shoulder if I was Dexter, knowing what I was capable of, knowing how I was used previously under the previous coaching staff at Florida. And I think that he has, been on a mission since he returned to show that rather than, make the leap. So I think that absolutely you're going to see a dominant campaign from Travon Dexter this season.
Well, there you go. That'll do it for us on the defensive line preview. Again, we're going through every Florida position group, talking about what they've got and what they've don't. And we are almost all the way through. The only things remaining now, secondary and linebacker. We will have those posted in the next couple of days. Again, this is Wednesday, August 31st when we recorded, and we'll post this one and more to come. I will also say, as Graham teased, we have a lot of content going up at swamp247.com right now. Written previews to get you ready for the season. We're following the team. Graham and I will be at every game. We do not miss a press conference, and we have coverage from all of those things. And as well, keep it locked on our YouTube and or Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you're listening to this. We certainly appreciate it. If you are on YouTube, hit subscribe. Drop a little subscribe for us. We post frequently. Turn on those notifications. We love to see the comments and the engagement from all of you. So definitely keep that up. And that's it for this one. We thank you again for listening. One more time, my name is Jacob Rudner alongside Graham Hall, and we will see you on the next episode.